My Mother, The Person and the Patient is an original podcast written and hosted by me, Fortuna Kuso. This podcast is about my mother, Timira Abdussamad Mohammed, Ayaya we call her, and that's the Somali word for grandmother, and her great-grandchildren call her Ayaya too, and that is their way of saying great-grandmother. In my last episode 18, I shared how my mother got really sick. She had this growth. The doctor called it boil. Just exploded in 48 hours. It was 4 or 5 times the size that it was on day 2. The doctor prescribed antibiotics that my mother should get intravenously. And the nurse will come in and set the IV up. Also, since we were only 5-6 days away from the Christmas break, the doctor said we need to get something for the pain. And when she says we need to get something for the pain, she means something for the pain for the end of life care. So when somebody is dying. So she said we're going to get that into the house just in case. Because if we need it, and it's Christmas Day or Boxing Day or Christmas Eve, and the pharmacy we wanted to get it from is not open, then we're going to have your mother in pain for a day or two for no particular reason. So let's go on and order that. So she said, you're going to get a package that has the antibiotics, and you're going to get a package that has medication for the pain. She said the pain package, it will say right there, you have to sign for it and just put it dry, room temperature place, and make sure nobody gets to it. And the antibiotics, when you get it, this is the number, call the nurse, and the nurse will come and she will set up the antibiotics line for your mother. She said, I'm going to order it now and you're going to get it. And when you get it, or when the pharmacy says they are on their way, let the nurse know, and the nurse will come and she will start the line for you. I wait, and that night I saw the doctor maybe around 3 o'clock, and then around 7 o'clock I get a call from we call it LIN. It used to be CCAC, so this is the arm of the healthcare system that does the community healthcare. So they're going to approve this prescription, and they're going to pay for the nurse to come in and start. So they said, we need your consent, because I have a power of attorney on my mother. So they wanted my consent to give the information to the pharmacy so the pharmacy can process and deliver this medication. So I gave them the consent, and then a little bit before 8, I got a call from the pharmacy. They said the driver with your medication is on his way. So as soon as they said the driver is on his way, I contact the agency that was supposed to send me the nurse. So they said, here's the number for the nurse, call this nurse. So I called the nurse and I explained the situation to her. So the nurse says, I do not know how to start IV line. And I thought all nurses, that was basic knowledge, but I don't know anything about nursing. But my understanding, and also intellectual understanding, because I don't know practical knowledge of it, I thought every nurse knows how to set an IV line. But this nurse tells me I don't know how to set an IV line, and I'm the only one working tonight. So what I will do is tomorrow, 9 o'clock, first nurse that gets in will come and will set the line for you. And I said, okay, I didn't know what else to do. So I said, okay, we're going to wait for the morning. But I'm in pins and needles and thinking this thing is going to triple and quadruple overnight if I don't start this antibiotics, because the doctor told me it takes about 48 hours for the antibiotics to take effect and deal with whatever it is we're looking at. So the nurse comes in as promised right at 9 o'clock. And she looks at the box with the medication and she says, this is not the right medication. This is the painkiller. You do not have the antibiotics here. What do you mean? They were supposed to deliver. And she said, if you got the antibiotics, you would have been told to put it in the fridge. It cannot stay in a box. What you have here is the pain medication that they delivered. They did not deliver the antibiotics. I called the pharmacy and they said, we have a note from the doctor that says she needed antibiotics and the painkiller, but the Lynn only approved and sent the approval and the consent for the pain, not the antibiotics. And I thought, okay, I am going to contact the Lynn myself. So I called the Lynn, somebody answers, and I explained the situation. And she says, give me a minute. And she comes back and she says, oh, we didn't send, sorry, we forgot to send the approval and the consent for the antibiotics. I'm going to do that right now. So she said, wait 15 minutes, call the pharmacy and have them deliver the medication. I wait 15 minutes. These are 15 long, agonizing minutes. And when I called back the pharmacy, they look and they said, we emailed them, you called them, but we didn't get anything. I called back the Lynn and I said, I contacted the pharmacy. I spoke to you half an hour ago, and the pharmacy is saying still they do not have this consent form. By this time, it's like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. The day got away from me, and I do not know what to do and how to deal with it. So I said, can you please send these information? She says, we did not forget to send it. We did not want to send because we sent an email to the doctor asking the doctor if your mother had received antibiotics orally. And the doctor tried that before they moved to the IV, and the doctor hasn't responded. Therefore, we didn't issue the consent and the request for the antibiotics. And I said, how come the person I spoke to an hour ago didn't tell me that? And she said, everybody here is not a nurse. And I said, and I'm supposed to know that? How am I supposed to know everybody in here is not a nurse? She said, we're going to contact the doctor. And I said, it's already afternoon. The doctor might not be in the office, and I do not want to wait another night. I waited all night last night. I'm waiting for another full day. I don't want to go through another night where my mother doesn't have the medication. And she said, give me a minute. She went and she came back and she said, somebody's going to call you back in 5 minutes. And I said, if somebody doesn't call me back in 5 minutes, I am calling back. I waited 4 minutes. Somebody called me and they said, okay, we can't get a hold of the doctors, but you have to give consent that you are okay, your mother, to take this medication. I said, yes, I'm going to give you the consent. So they record my consent and they sent it. So by the time the antibiotics arrived at my house was 9 o'clock that night. I call again, and that same nurse who couldn't start the line is working that night again. And then she said, another nurse will come in the morning. Next morning, I took that day off work and I waited at home, waiting for the nurse to come. The nurse didn't come, but luckily that day I had wound care nurse, this young man, the best nurse ever, coming in to take care of that thing growing as a wound nurse. So he's specialized as a wound nurse. So he's trying to deal with the wound, telling me how to dress it, how to take care of it, how to make sure that she's comfortable and all that. So he's training me on that. And at some point, I tell him, this is what's going on. I have this antibiotics I've been trying to start for 2 days. I'm still waiting for a nurse that can start the line. And the nurse that I spoke to last night and night before said she cannot start line. And I was supposed to get the first nurse available this morning, and I didn't. He said, show it to me. And it took that young man maybe 2 minutes, if that. He set the line, he started antibiotics, and he said, once a day nurse will come to make sure the line is clean. He was so kind to me, and that has made all the difference. When you listen to how we arrived at my mother's diagnosis and what followed, it's so easy to see her just as the patient, to see her as nothing more than the disease that reduced her to shell of her old self. But I want to also to tell you about my mother, the person, the fierce woman that told her stories unapologetically, celebrating the beautiful parts and harsh realities equally. I want to share with you the stories she told us about her life as a girl growing up in a small village. The tales that marked her adulthood. I want to share with you all her losses and the ultimate winnings. The following chapter is one of those stories, reconstructed from my childhood memory. Timira's best friend's curiosity about what it was like to be married disappeared under her constant hurling. Saadia and Ambia stepped away from her that first day, squirming as the sound of her gagging shattered their desire to be near her. Timira paid close attention to the rumblings in her stomach, hoping each morning would be the day she returned to normal again. In her sleep, she whispered to herself, reminding herself she'd made the right decision. It will all be over soon. In her audacity to dissolve her marriage of 6 weeks, she didn't think she'd be condemned to keep the company of women her mother's age or even older. She wanted to return to girls her age soon, to play with her friends again. She didn't realize how much she loved to be with Alia and Saadia. They accepted her for taking the cursed finger. They didn't run away at her approach as they had done after her mother and brother's death. They were more surprised that she chose to leave all that comfort. It wasn't picking the cursed finger that stunned them, but her reasons for giving up all that luxury shocked them. Who cares if he smells, Saadia exclaimed. Buy incense at the market. Or have the servant wash his clothes and beddings every day. Ambia agreed with her. I bet you could have trained him out of it. Trained him? He's not a bull, you know. Timira laughed, and they joined her in the hilarity. Before the turmoil of the pregnancy began, she spent all her time answering their questions about the city, the market, Nita Kane's house, and his servant. Even his bed wasn't safe from their inquiry. Timira skirted around some of the questions, telling the girls half-truths. In others, she told the whole truth. None bothered her because she was a girl with her friends. A little lost privacy was a small price to pay for that. It took 16 long weeks to stop sprinting to the outhouse several times each day. As quickly as it had ambushed her, the never-ending nausea disappeared. It wasn't a gradual release of its grip, but a sudden drop from its vicious claws that let her fall into her friend's company with a dizzying speed. What a relief. I thought you were going to die, Saadia said, like your insides would come out or something. It was bad, but I'm well now, Timira said, hoping not to dwell on it. That first afternoon, after she finished the chores and her friends completed their lessons, Timira pulled the skipping rope from under her bed and called Saadia and Alia. Let's play, she said. Her feet hit the ground with a loud smack, filling her with joy. On the flight over the rope, she forgot she was pregnant. Every free moment she had, she'd spend hanging out with her friends. It wasn't until the exhaustion of the day's work pushed her toward home that she left their company behind and crawled into bed. Timira didn't wake up fearing what lay ahead on those nights. She didn't suffer the nightmares that brought the memory of Nita Kane's house. She slept like a log. As the pace of time crept forward, her carefree days dwindled. No matter how much she tried to ignore the dramatic change in her body, her belly began to protrude. Soon she grew too slow and too tired for her friends. She rubbed her belly constantly. How far along are you anyway? Saadia asked her one of those days. They were sitting under the qura tree, helping her knit little outfits for the baby. Too far along, she said. It's been 7 months since her return home, Anbiya commented. 7 months, how time flies, Saadia responded. For Timira, time stood still. The hours stared at her mockingly, daring her to leave the troubles of her poor, pregnant self behind. No matter how hard she tried to will it ahead, sunrise and sunset changed place in lugubrious slowness. I just wanted out of me. She didn't bother to hide the resentment she held for the child inside, and didn't regret speaking her mind. You don't want to rush it out, Aliyah said. The longer it stays there, the healthier it will come out, Saadia added. Timira didn't care about the well-being of the child. She wasn't even sure if she valued it as a person. The only thing she craved was her lost freedom, the ability to be with her friends during the day, the comfort of sleeping at night without feeling dozens of knives stabbing at her all at once. She wanted the unrelenting ache in her back that replaced the nausea of the first 16 weeks to be over. She wanted to stop turning and tossing all night, cursing at her mother for choosing death over them, hissing at the memory of Nietzsche Cain for planting his seed inside her when he knew she didn't care for him. She chastised herself for agreeing to marry him. Even her father didn't escape the torrent of anger that flew out of her. He should have been more forceful in his refusal to marry her off. To deny his consent for the union would have saved her from the life of motherhood forced upon her without her saying so. Wait till it smiles. Marian spoke about some deeply held memory of childbirth. Those toothless gums would make your heart melt inside. I doubt it. Timira scoffed at the certainty in which the woman spoke, even though she wished she was right. It would be a blessing if the little person inside her could teach her how to love again. She would have loved it if the baby could wipe the fear of the wound that comes with loving others. Perhaps her deep-rooted scars left behind by her mother would be healed by the birth of her child. The price of holding a newborn would be worth breaking a promise to herself to never open her heart for another, only to be stomped on. I just wanted it out, Timiro repeated to the staring woman every afternoon. You are in for a surprise, one of the other women stated. It's the best love there is. Love only exists to hurt, Timira said. Let us hear you say that after the little bean comes out. Marian laughed aloud. Other women nodded in agreement. The 4 weeks that made the 9th month of her pregnancy grew dreary and protracted. Those 4 weeks felt much longer than the 32 weeks that preceded them. Her feet swelled twice to their normal size, and she gave up wearing shoes by the end of the 8th month, moving in slow motion, large-bellied and barefoot. Timira and 2 other women were digging potatoes from the garden the day it happened. The pain started in her lower abdomen. Unlike other stomach aches, it didn't remain there. It radiated down to her feet. Sweat ran down her back, rolling to the seat of her dress. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, placed her right hand on her knees, and hoisted herself up. She reached halfway before her stomach pulled her to the ground and her butt pointed skyward. Timira froze in place. Knives like those the villagers used to slaughter the animal landed on her back. The pain was so sharp, Timira couldn't breathe. Everything, even the air, stood still. The attack lasted for mere seconds, but when he let go, Timira collapsed onto the ground. Her muscles were weak, her body limp. "I think I am dying," Timira managed to say. Was this what her mother felt before she left them? "You are not dying. You're becoming a mother," Marian exclaimed. Marian and Veris knew what to do. They gathered Timira in their arms and took her home. She felt spent and exhausted beyond her limit when the midwife appeared at the door. But instinct took over. Her body responded to the constant order to push, stop, and push as the midwife barked orders. She hated every second of that ordeal. But when the midwife placed her son in her arms, his wailing didn't fill her with the joy other women had promised. Her heart didn't flutter with the weight of the happiness other mothers spoke about. It was hard to tell which, the pain of childbirth or the disappointment of not falling in love with the baby hurt more. But holding her child did nothing to dispel the betrayal left by her mother's departure or her deeply held belief that love was synonymous with her. Were Veris and Marian wrong? Had all the other mothers exaggerated the unequaled love that descended upon them at the first sight of their baby? Or was there something wrong with her? Perhaps her heart had forgotten how to love. Nothing changed even after she'd forced her eyes on the squirming baby, his tiny body warm against her skin. She wanted nothing more than to access the same love the other mothers did. But like her marriage to Nita Kane to help her father, she failed in giving and receiving the unconditional love other mothers enjoyed. All she could think about was how tired she was and the overwhelming need to rest, to sleep until all the pain and hurt of the past year have left her body. Even as the midwife and other women took turns helping the baby boy latch onto her breast, Timira lay there still and moving. She closed her eyes and imagined herself away from the scene. That was the only thing to do to avoid crying. My Mother, the Person and the Patient can be found in Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please remember to follow, like, and share, and join me next week as I share with you another episode of my mother's journey as both the person and the patient. Thank you.